Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Business Barbershop Podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Keane.
And today, and by we, I mean Keane, is going to blow your mind with his financial plan for success. So, I don't know much about this plan. I'm going to be learning at the same time that you are, but apparently, this thing is amazing. And it's also maybe a little complex. So, we're going to break this up into a couple different episodes. And if you are watching this in the future, it's because he wanted to also preserve this so that when he was talking to people about it, he could just say, go look at this video. So this is part one of Keane's financial plan of awesomeness.
Yeah, I mean, as a precursor, I should say that this is a live tweaking, modifying plan. I always am open to making it better. A lot of the material that I use to create the plan has been developed in just recent times, including some of the stuff that we've learned from some guests that we've had on our show. So it's taken me a long time to share it because it was a work in progress, but also I really needed some time to validate all of the pieces of the plan. But it addresses a lot of the things that we've talked about in the show. You know, investing in stocks versus real estate, the wealthy building real estate, the risk that's associated with real estate, and the problems that, there's problems in all the different investment spaces. And this plan is designed to take the average real estate investor or person who wants to build wealth with real estate and creates a very comprehensive plan of how to build your wealth and diversify so you're not only in real estate and have this amazing cash flowing retirement at the end that doesn't create nearly as much work as most of the plans I hear other people. Now, I'm also going to give a precursor that this plan has pieces of what I've heard other people teach. And my friend Thatch was the one I learned BRRRR investing from. But I can tell you that the exit strategy and the meat and potatoes of the exit part of this plan are very not Thatch. And something against Thatch's plan. Thatch, what he tells people actually is a lot of the same stuff that we got from our mutual mentor, which is a gentleman, friend, mentor of mine by the name of Saul Zaradel. He's also Thatch's mentor. But you can tell that it's coming from a person who is a real estate investor who has a background in finance and banking. Because the pieces that were added to it are very tax driven and include products that are sold on Wall Street that a lot of real estate investors aren't that aware of. I've actually found that when I was going through the process of validating this plan with a lot of very experienced real estate investors, the ones that have built a lot of wealth who are younger didn't even know some of the things that I put in the plan. Financial advisors do. And when we talk to the financial advisors about these products, and we talk about the profile of the investors that use it, it makes perfect sense to me as to why the investors don't know about it, because they usually find out about it out of desperation when they're old and tired. So I'm excited to share it though, because I validated it. So what happened was about this plan as a whole was the base of it was set up just really recent. Like I said, a lot of it's been moving parts, but the bulk of it, where there's a clear A to Z pathway, was designed a little over a year ago, and I've used this last year to kind of tweak, add some pieces to it. And I didn't actually think other people would be, even though it has all the pieces I was looking for in the plan. I thought because there were so many moving parts, because there's so many aspects that require this high level knowledge that and different learning about these different things, that people weren't going to be interested in doing it. But it was for me. It was very similar to my business. My business is to help other people build wealth, and teaching them how to do what I did. This is the meat and potatoes of the whole plan. And so as I met some investors, I casually kind of shared it with them. And that process of me casually sharing it with them is literally the reason why working with investors has become my primary business, because I didn't think people would be interested in it. And not only were people interested in it, there's so many people interested in it that this has replaced my, I thought helping investors was going to represent about a quarter, half of my business, like a quarter now, and maybe grow to half over 10 years. And it's jumped to be over 90% of my business since I started sharing it. And so I thought, well, hell, if people are interested in this, then it's time to share it. And I've listened to so many Bigger Pockets podcasts, and they touch on a lot of the things that are in this plan. But I've never had someone say, here's a plan that a lot of people can copy paste to some part, and it will create wealth for everybody if they knew how to do these things. But I will give a pre-warning. There are some things in here that are very hard. That's why my clients rely on me to help them do these hard things. So the numbers make sense and they pencil great, but it's not something you can just be like, let me cut a check and Keane's going to make me worth 30 million bucks. Yeah. That's not how it works. It's, I will teach you how to be a $30 million net worth investor, and I will guide you through it, but you still need to do the work, right? So there's my background to it.
Okay, sweet. I'm excited.
All right.
You ready to do this?
Yep. And I have not given a name to it. I haven't been good at creating names for it. I'm sure someone out there could make a great name for it, because I've heard people in real estate make up these new terms. House hacking was something I never used before. BRRRR investing, I never used before. The concept of these things, I would talk about them in strategies. So the idea of what people, all these things always made sense to me. And very often I knew them before I heard the term. But in recent years, I've heard people come up with these great names like owner-occupied house hacks, and all these kind of things that people just come up with these great terms. The FIRE community, I didn't know about that. I've been talking about financial independence for years, and all of a sudden I found there's a community called FIRE. I'm like, oh well, I've been a solo FIRE supporter for decades before the term FIRE was even being used. So, okay, so let's get into it. So you can see my screen.
Nope.
Okay.
You're about to. You're about to see it. There it is.
All right.
Can you zoom in?
Yep. And I'll just scroll it.
Keep going. Right there is good. That's gonna be perfect right there.
All right. So let's talk about the first part. And technically, like there's a high level of knowledge that's needed for the second and third phase, but the hardest thing is in the first phase. Out of all the things that people are gonna learn, this part is the hardest part. I always joke that with my investors, I tell them there's two speeds that real estate investors operate off of. If you're newer to real estate, it's there's two different speeds that you're going to work at. There's technically three speeds, but people typically only operate in two. Those two speeds are way too slow and way too fast.
Okay. Yep.
I took years to start way too slow. Once I started, I went way too fast and did some deals I shouldn't have done, because proof of concept gets proven, then you get confidence, and then you get excited, and then you start to get too loose.
Yep.
And there's the third one, right? We're really talking about like Goldilocks and the three bears, right? There's like too slow, too fast, just right.
Yeah.
But most people never get to just right.
Yep.
Most people start off too slow, they go too fast, and they go back to too slow when they have too much. And that's basically my story, right?
Yep.
But I try to, I do my best to try to guide my clients to that just right. They don't end up just being right there, but that's one of the things I also do with them is I shelter them from themselves. I try to speed them up a little bit when they're at the beginning, and then I'm always pulling them back once they get started because they're trying to go too fast. So the first phase, which if any seasoned real estate investor, or even someone who's just beginning but has done research will know this, is to acquire properties through the BRRRR method. Okay. However, it's important that in my plan that the properties you own are in areas that have high appreciation, and as your net worth is higher, it's important that you try to squeeze in some higher value products and rentals in your mix, because we've talked about this before on the show. Real estate, where it really benefits in returns over the stock market, is we are naturally more knowledgeable in local real estate than we are in the stock market. People know the neighborhoods they've lived in their whole life better than they know how to read a 10K of a business, correct? I think you made a good point in one of the other shows that the one exception to that rule would be someone who maybe works for a company. Like, oh, I own a lot of stock in Amazon, and I've been an employee there for 10 years, and I'm heavily involved in the development products, which is one of the methods that you can have insider information and not be considered an insider information violation to the SEC because you're an employee, right?
Yep.
So outside of that scenario, most people don't have intimate knowledge of businesses they invest in when it comes to the stock market, which is why most people don't get great returns in the stock market. It's also one of the reasons why the politicians get way better returns, because they can't get prosecuted for insider information, and they're literally passing the bills that would benefit a company, right? Which is why, like, I think there's this new company like Autopilot or whatever that lets you, if you want, you can duplicate your portfolio to like some politicians like Nancy Pelosi. I put in like
they follow like the SEC filings or something that they have to do.
Yeah.
And just buy what they're buying.
Yeah.
It's a little delayed, but yes, that definitely happens.
Yeah, it's clever. So, but the idea of it is that we need to include some higher value properties if you're higher net worth and income, because you have to remember that there's always opportunities to make great returns on lower price points. So we need to get these price points high enough that it will really move the needle for your net worth. And the reason I give that as an example is, think of like, you've ever heard Gary Vaynerchuk give people, like newer entrepreneurs, tips on how to build wealth? And he tells people to do things like, hey, let's go to like a garage sale, look for little collectibles, right? And then sell them on eBay for like thousands of % return. Well, if you're making $500,000 a year or more, even though your ROI of that money you spent has an amazing return, there's a cap value of that investment that doesn't move the needle for your net worth, right? It's also the reason why I would never be able to convince someone like Warren Buffett to, even if I'm getting better returns than Berkshire is getting today on my investments, it's not wise for him to divert part of Berkshire's money to invest in someone like me, because we can't do enough deals to move the value of Berkshire's stock value because it's too small of a percentage of the portfolio. Right.
It's like buying, it's like buying a property that's $100K and you're going to get a 25% return. That's $25,000.
Yeah.
Versus buying a $400,000 house and getting a 25% return, which is $100,000. So
that's correct.
If you buy more, just your cut of that is just bigger.
Right.
That's why you want to go higher value, because you're getting more, even if it might be the same return, the net or the actual money is higher because you're starting at a higher price point.
That's right. That's right. So if you're gonna do a leveraged return where your cash on cash return on the leverage basis gives you huge amounts of return on investment, right? It doesn't mean that much if the deal size is so small. It barely, you can even, it doesn't move the needle for even what you live off of each month. That's why when I hear Gary Vaynerchuk tell new entrepreneurs to do that, I think it's brilliant, because it forces them to think like an investor, but it does also present one of the limitations with investments. And technically, even real estate, as expensive as real estate is, if you follow my plan, if you do the plan, it'll actually create that problem. You'll grow your net worth big enough where pretty soon these deals won't mean that much to you anymore, right? Also, one of the reasons why I'm helping other clients do this, because I'm kind of at that stage. My portfolio right now is worth about $20 million. I have about I'm about 50% leverage, right? And if I do a deal that makes me $500,000 richer, that's only going to move my equity of my real estate portfolio up 5%. But when I started off with $1 million, it was 50%, right?
Right. Yep.
Now, one thing to remember too is that there's basic strategies that's involved with basic real estate investing that still applies here, right? A lot of people who do value adds get so focused on value adds that they forget that real estate has these other natural benefits, like the tax shelters and the leverage growth. So let's just talk about the leverage growth part of the BRRRR investing. My portfolio, which I, for the most part, have just started as of last year, kind of shutting down rapid acquisitions. So I was in rapid acquisitions for 5 years. I don't expect people to build their portfolios as big as mine that same 5-year period, because in my 5-year period, I had COVID and low rates. But what I also have learned is that what most people's goals are a lot lower than what I built for myself, right? And technically, my own goals, I kind of overshot my goals too, as I kind of went through the numbers. So my 5-year acquisition period gave me a total of $20 million worth of rentals, $10 million in leverage, right? And now I'm going to begin my hold process period. And the holding period gives me 2 benefits. It's going to give me some tax shelters, which we'll get into, and it'll give me the leverage growth. But the leverage growth is an important part of this plan, because the leverage growth is why even buying regular real estate non-BRRRR method can have really good returns, is from the leverage.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, before we go any farther,
yep,
the attorney in me is ringing alarm bells.
Oh, yes.
This is not financial advice.
No.
Okay. This is just Keane's idea for what he's doing.
Yep. I'm not a financial planner.
That's right. Don't do any of this without talking to a professional or
Mhm.
without figuring out what you're going to do, but just don't run out and do any of this stuff without, I don't know, doing some more due diligence. Okay.
I'm not a real estate agent. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a tax accountant. And we're incorporating knowledge bases from all these experts. I have a great team. I designed the plan, but I didn't implement any of it without validating the concepts with each of my professionals that I've hired. And
That's
so
right.
as you see this, if you adopt this strategy, it's very important that you educate yourself on what we're doing, validate it with the people who are going to be handling your finances before you ever execute on any of it.
Yeah. Because
Okay.
there could be some aspects of this plan that are different. For example, depending on the state that you live in, there's no income tax in Washington state, for example.
Yeah.
This plan could be a little bit different or very different depending on the state that you live in, and maybe some state income tax implications that we don't even know about. Okay.
Yep.
So that's just like as an example. And I don't even know if it's different or not, but just if you're watching this, just don't run off and do something stupid. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Take the high point. All the tax strategies I'm discussing in this, again, you need to talk to an enrolled agent, CPA, or tax attorney before you implement. And all of it's incorporating and discussing tax sheltering on a federal level, not on a state level. And states have different forms of taxes where it'd be B&O taxes, if they consider certain incomes, especially like short-term rentals, B&O tax, potential income tax. And in some states, I think we were trying to pass a capital gains tax. I'm not sure. Does any other state have a capital gains tax? I don't know, but we were trying to
Yeah,
do one.
not many do because most have an income tax.
Yeah.
Yep.
So back to the strategy. The first thing is we're going to acquire a number of rentals, preferably as high a value as you can afford to do, that also project for strong appreciation. Now, remember, this is a little bit speculative, right? But this is why I think it's wise for people to invest in areas they're familiar with. And some people don't value their own personal knowledge enough. If you have spent and lived in an area for a prolonged period of time, you should have a good understanding of that market, because you literally, like, it's kind you're by choosing where you want to live, choosing where you're comfortable living, choosing where you're comfortable working, right? And then experiencing that for many years, you've already started to set a standard for what you consider to be good locations, as you will, right?
Yep.
And that's why I always tell people, you have more insider information about your local real estate that you give yourself credit for. Don't fight that. Don't fight that. You know more. If, like, I grew up in Kent, Washington, live in Renton, one city that borders Kent. I lived as far north as Lake Stevens for like 6 months, and the further south I ever lived was Auburn. So I lived in Snohomish County for 6 months. The rest of the time I've all been in King County, and guess what? Almost all my stuff is in King County, right? A lot of my rentals are in Alki and West Seattle, and I've been going to that neighborhood since I was a teenager to hang out with my friends, right?
Yep.
So, which is why I invested so heavily in there when their values were kind of stagnant and their rents were low during COVID, because COVID kind of scared investors. Plus the bridge went down to access West Seattle. But I was like, I've been going there since I was a kid, and they might have a little bump in the road, but they're going to rebound really nicely. There's nothing that projects that the area is going to get massively impacted. It's just going to be a very temporary thing, right?
Yep.
So lean on your own personal knowledge. So we acquire our real estate in these high value appreciating areas. And again, do your best to stretch in the price point, but do it with a lot of personal validation of the areas that you personally know, because that's one of the biggest risks associated with real estate. Is it's illiquid and it's leveraged. So leveraged investments multiply your returns, but they can also multiply your losses. So if it's one of the best advice I ever got from my mentor, Saul, is if it's not a place that you think that you could live in, right, then don't do it. Diane's called me 4 times. Let me just text her real quick.
Yep.
Now the first thing is I before I finished designing this plan, I just kept on acquiring, knowing that I'd have some exit strategy, but I was literally just trying to acquire until my exit number was big enough to equal my goals. And then I finally got tired and was like, man, I've got like 30 mortgages, 30 rentals. Do I really need to keep stacking them? And then all of a sudden it kind of hit me like, well, wait a minute, real estate, I bought all this real estate in good areas because I expect strong appreciation. And so why am I trying to chase that number through work? naturally it should just grow to a
Yeah.
number and not just grow, but grow on a multiplier because of the leverage. So let's go back to my portfolio. 5 years of acquisitions. My real estate valuation of all my rentals for that 5-year period is about $20 million. There's some room to actually make that worth more without making another acquisition, because a lot of them need to be updated. And with the new laws that pass, I have a lot of land that I can build. But let's just pretend I'm not going to do any of it. I'm just going to sit on it. If cash flow is positive, I'm good. So I have a $20 million portfolio, $10 million equity position. Now on the so the first part is doing that. Now one of the problems with that process is that might sound simple, but anyone who's actually tried to do a BRRRR investment. So the idea of a BRRRR investment is that you put money into a property, you make it worth more, you pull your money back out, so you're into the deal zero, but you're not over leveraged because what you owe relative to what it's worth still has a lot of equity, and the rent will still service the debt. That's what a BRRRR is. And a BRRRR is any kind of method of doing that. What the pinnacle, the kind of mecca of BRRRR investing is where you can get all of your money out and it cash flows. We call that 100% BRRRR in the community. And most people would say that Seattle is not a 100% BRRRR market. So any market that has cap rates that trade lower than the average interest rate for what your mortgages are, usually 100% BRRRR doesn't work. And people will say, BRRRRs don't work here. So, but I've been doing it. And so people wonder how do you do it? If cap rates are trading at 5.5%, and rental rates are between 6.5%, 7%, how are you capable? You have to find these properties for massive discounts, and then you're trying to compete with every other investor, which then drives up the price, or you're basically stealing dilapidated properties from old people who don't know what they're selling. I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm doing. What I did is I came up with a new way to do a BRRRR investment, and I actually made my own term for it. I call it a BRFR. People always laugh when they hear it because it sounds funny. But what I'm doing is I'm basically just being a developer. So most developers develop to sell, and most developers, it's their job, and they make a lot of. If they do it right, they'll make a lot of money. But I remember one time I met a person who I showed him what I would do. One of my coworkers was saying that his cousin or brother, I can't remember, when he saw the numbers that we were getting on our stuff, he basically said, "I don't believe you." I once heard a person say, if you ever get better than if someone promises a higher than 20% return on your investment, it's probably not real or too risky, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about what that statement was, and I thought, yeah, I understand where that's coming from, and I've heard that same statement. So why is it we're making these better returns? Here's the answer. Later on, I realized what it was. Because what I'm doing isn't traditionally done for investing. Developers who develop real estate do not operate on 10 to 15% margins. They would go bankrupt if there's a tiny market correction. But they're not investors, if you think about it. A developer who develops to sell, that's their job. That's their business. And if they're operating on, let's say, a 35% margin, that's their margin for a cost of goods business. Does it make sense? If you go talk to a business owner and they say, my business only nets 8 to 12% net of the expenses to profit on a cost of goods business, and some of them exist like that, you would look at them and say, even if you're making a lot of money, you have to be really good at what you do to make sure you're financially safe, because with that kind of a margin, there could be a slight correction in value. You could have agent inventory that isn't worth as much, and you could lose everything, right? So what I'm doing is I'm mimicking what these developers do in terms of margin, but it's not my job like it is theirs. I know developers who will build more houses in one quarter than the rentals I have because they build so much product. But yet they have way less rentals than me because this is how they eat.
Right.
Right. So just to validate, how is it possible that I was able to get $20 million worth of real estate with a $10 million debt position in a five-year period? And the answer is, I don't eat off of this money. I make money helping people with mortgages, right? Traditionally for 20 years, just doing mortgages. Now I'm doing the mortgages and consultations for the developments, but I have a job and I live off of my earned income. I develop part-time on the side to build a portfolio. So I don't ever eat off the money I make. So the BRFRR model in development is specifically that I want to, let's say I buy a house in Seattle for 700 grand. I put 100 grand in renovation into it. It's worth maybe 850. Then maybe I condo it and it's worth back to 7 because it's only a condo. But it meant I spent a couple hundred grand to get the dirt that I condoed off. And then now I'm building some other units. And let's say when I'm all done, I'm into the property 1.5 million. And let's say it's worth 2.5 million. So I made $1 million in equity on it. Let's just say those are the gross numbers.
Yep.
It does not mean, even though I have $1 million in equity, it does not mean that, let's say I built 2 new houses next to the original house and I condoed it so that way they can each be sold separately. Just because I have $1 million in equity, that $1 million of equity is not because it cash flows the service 1.5 million. This isn't multifamily investing. This is single family investing. And the value of single family properties are based off what a home buyer would pay for it. They're not evaluated based off of rent. So we have all this equity, but it doesn't necessarily cash flow. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So now I'm done. I have $1 million in equity. I have $2.5 million of real estate, 1.5 million in equity. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
Here, real quick, let's take that one step further just so that everybody really, really understands. So you're talking about you're in what you say you're in for $1 million and it's worth 2.
Let's say you're into the whole thing for 1.5 million.
Oh yeah. And it's worth 2.5, right?
Yep.
Your debt carry on that maybe, let's say, I'm just going to make up a number, maybe $15K a month, right? I'm just making up a number, but the rent that you can get may not equal $15K a month off of both of those, off of all of the properties that are there, right? So the cash that you're generating from the properties doesn't necessarily service the debt, even though you have created a significant amount of equity in the property.
Yep. And if I sold it all, I would obviously make a profit like the developers do.
Right.
Right. It wouldn't be exactly $1 million because there's selling costs and taxes and all that stuff.
Right.
But there's a lot of equity that if I did sell it, I would have a huge cash infusion.
Right.
Plus a lot of taxes to go with it.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is the scenario that you're talking about so far, right?
Right.
Where you're creating a lot of equity, but it may not always be cash flow positive when you're done.
That's correct.
Yeah. All right.
So now, if you hear that, when I say it's worth 2.5 million, it's not one property, it's worth 2.5 million. Part of that valuation is that I took that house, I built a couple of ADUs on it, and the average value of those 3 units combined is 2.5 million. Does that make sense? Yep. So in actuality, that 1.5 and debt and 2.5 million in value is more like a $830,000 average value per property with an average mortgage of 500,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we made $1 million in equity. And what happens is almost all investors are focused on one of 2 things. I want the right now money, because those people sell, right? And then if they keep going down that pathway, they become those like full-time developers and they're excited and they feel like they're getting rich and all that stuff, but they're still in that same hamster wheel of like, I make a lot of money, I get taxed on a lot of money, and I still got to figure out how to invest it to make long-term wealth. So that's not really what I'm doing, and that's not my client, right? What I'm doing is like, look, those guys could keep going down that pathway if you already have a solid form of earning income. So my strategy works better for people who have a good income. You know, a lot of these real estate investors that you'll see like in bigger pockets were people who had very average to sometimes even below average jobs, and their first goal was to get financial freedom that would equal or exceed their current job. So, you know, like some of the people I follow for short-term rentals, like the Robinsons, you know, Tony literally started his investing career when he was laid off. So for him, investing was a huge success from the stories I've heard him talk about when his short-term rentals exceeded the income from his current job, because now he's working for himself, plus he has equity in the properties and he can keep growing it, right? Which are great stories, but that doesn't change the fact that it's not my story, right?
Yep.
So my plan was built for me, which I did find out does fit other people's scenarios. My plan is I make good money already. I'm happy with the money I make, but my job is stressful. So any form of a financial plan that says I need to do this to my 60s doesn't sound very exciting, because unfortunately high-paying jobs typically have higher stress, and people who are working 50, 60 hours a week do not want to be told they should work all the way to 65, just like the person who's only working 40 hours a week, right? Like, I know we're making good money. I'm really proud of my career, but that does not mean I want to do it till I'm 65, right?
Yeah.
So it's built for that profile. Maybe it's a doctor, software engineer, whatever, right? But someone who makes a pretty good income and can live just fine off their current income. But when they look at all of their financial projections from an advisor about retirement, they're looking at saying like, I don't want to do this in my 60s so I can get some retirement that's like a fraction of my current earned income. That sucks, right? And quietly, I was screaming inside, is this as good as it's going to get, right? And so this is designed to fix that problem.
Yep, totally.
So we develop on a slower scale because this isn't our full-time job. We are doing it on the side of our full-time job. But because our goal is to hold, we rather lean towards holding. But the other mistake people make in this space is that that holding investors are so focused on holding, they're not willing to sell anything. And that actually prevents them from having more. Because even though they're making good money, we all have limited capital. We don't have, if you have unlimited capital, why are we even doing this, right?
Right.
So we're trying to build a net worth. And even though we might make good money, maybe 300, 600, 900, 1,000 a year, which really equals like, 200, 400, 600 grand a year because we get killed in taxes. That's the other problem, right? We do live fine off that income, but we want to be able to see a retirement that's close to that kind of income when we're done and before 60, right? And so this is designed to help fix that problem. So we are developing on a part-time basis to build up a portfolio. And the right way to do it is not to focus on holding or focus on selling. It's the focus is growth through a combination of the two. And that's what a BRFRR is. A BRFRR is selling just enough that you can get all of your capital that you put into the property back and hold properties at a leverage position that they do cash flow. So that way you can ride that long-term appreciation on it, okay? And a lot of people, when they hear this, they go, oh, well, my rentals in the Midwest get way better cash on cash returns, and my cash on equity in terms of a cash flow position is better. I'm like, yes, but I'm not doing this for cash flow yet. I'm doing this for capital, net worth, and growth. Because one thing I've always understood as a banker is you can always trade capital for cash flow, but it takes a long time for cash flow to equal capital. So what I mean by that is if someone gives you $10,000 a month for free forever, like that lotto ticket that says lucky for life, that might sound good to some people, but technically about $2.25 million in the bank does the same thing, because there's investments out there that you can get a 5% dividend on, and it's going to give you the same thing, right?
Yep.
So I can easily convert a couple $1 million into 10 grand a month, and I still have the 2 million that I could access if I ever needed to, right?
Yep.
But it takes a long time for 10 grand to equal $2 million, right?
Yeah. So let's just start. Let's just keep your example going through the flow. Okay. So
I know we're taking time on this, but I promise the other pieces go by a lot faster.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is so right now in the example, we have
830 value.
Property would have it has two condos on it, essentially, or sort of two separate parcels. This may not be the exact language. And you've got $1 million in equity, 2.5 total. So 1.5 in debt.
Yep.
Are you then liquidating these as your first purchase to provide you more capital to do this all over again?
Let's say the total amount of money I put into this project to buy the initial property, a down payment, develop it, and cover negative holding costs was $350,000. So I want to find a way to get that $350 back and still have some of these rentals. Okay. So if the average value is $830,000, we're going to assume that the cost of selling is about 10%. It's a little bit less than that. These are the gross numbers I use that are conservative. That means if I sold each one of those rentals at 830, I would net 747, and I owe an average of 500,000, right? So remember, my total cost into it is 1.5. And so if my retained mortgage on the rentals I have, plus the sale proceeds equal that 1.5 million, I get all my money back. So let's say I sell 2 units for 830, okay? Which means I net, let's say I net 747,000 times 2, and I owed 1.5 million. Well, I'm going to basically own the third one free and clear, which sounds great, but that also is like,
in our example you made 3 out of 1.
Yes, I bought a property for let's say 700 grand.
Yes.
And I remodeled and built 2 other units. And let's say I'm all
Got it.
into that whole process for about 1.5 million.
That's right.
And now
I
I
just
have
want
a
to make sure because
value.
I said two, and I want to be clear. It's 3. That's all.
Yeah, 3 units.
Yep. Okay.
3 units, average value of 830, 500,000 in mortgage on each one. So I'm done. I have
Right.
3 mortgages, each 500 grand, 3 properties worth 830. And even though I have $1 million in equity, I don't have a positive cash flow investment.
Right.
So I first played the idea of maybe I'll sell 2. If I sell 2, after selling costs, I net 1.494, which of course will pay off all of the 1.5 million in debt,
including
right?
the third property.
Right.
So you'll own
including the
number
third property.
3
So
free
now
and
I
clear.
own the last one free and clear. And if I do all my calculations and say, okay, up to this point, between holding costs, development costs, my down payment, I want to cash out maybe like 200 grand extra to recoup the rest of my money, right? Then I would take out maybe a $200,000 mortgage, right? Now I'm whole, right?
Yep. Yes.
And I owe 200 grand on a place that's worth 830, right? And that does cash flow.
Yep.
In fact, those numbers look so good. I would probably revisit. Maybe I should just sell 1 and keep 2, so we could visit that. Let's say we just sold 1, so I net 747. I owe 1.5 into it, right? And I'm basically going to see, can I service 750 grand worth of debt on 2 properties that are each worth about 830 and still cash flow, and maybe cash out a little bit if there's some numbers I didn't calculate, like holding costs and soft costs that I have not reimbursed myself yet. And that probably is true. I probably could keep 2. Okay. Yep. So that is what a BRFRR is. Now, there is a taxable event when you sell some of them. So the ones that you do sell, you're going to be paying tax on. The catch on it is going to come in the other phases. There are, which we'll cover. So there's but the initial part is be prepared, even with my following strategies, that you might have to pay some tax, right, for this stage. But it's a method to build a portfolio and get your money back and still be in a high value market. That's the first stage of it. Okay.
Yep.
Now notice on my bullet points, that to make it cash flow, we might do a mixture of different kind of rents, and I might be nudging people towards short-term rentals. I know they're a pain in the ass. We'll find out why. It has to do with tax savings. And I have a calculation for, okay, if we want to build a portfolio, but we also, even though we may not be trying to retire, this plan is not designed to retire in 3 to 5 years. This is a 10 to 20-year retirement plan from when you start. But for most people, it's about 15. But if you start at 40, that means that we're talking about 55. And some people are like, well, I want to find a way to retire sooner than that. Yes, but you have to remember that what I was trying to do with this plan is not meant for everyone, but you'll know if it's meant for you. This plan is meant for the person who has a very successful career, makes a lot of money, wants to find a way to retire before 62 and not have the retirement look like some watered down version of their current income, right? They have high expenses. In the FIRE community, I've heard them call this chubby FIRE. It's financial independence, retire early with a lot of cash flow and first world expenses, right? Because you can get the financial independence a lot faster if you don't have kids and you decide to be an expat in Thailand or Mexico, right? You can get there pretty fast then. But this is not we're not blending that into the strategy. This is you live in a $2 million house in Kirkland, right? You have a vacation home in Arizona, and you're used to living off of a 30, 40,000 gross number or 20 to 25,000 net number, and you don't want to lose that lifestyle even in your retirement years. This is the plan that gives you that, okay? So once you acquire your portfolio, right, we want to get enough rentals that on that 15 or 20-year projection, the cash flow number would equal about your retirement goals, which for most of my clients, we're targeting something similar to their current income based off the cash flow going into a Delaware statutory trust, which I'll explain that more also a little bit later on, okay? Okay, so let's say that for one particular person's plan, they want to get 10 properties, okay? And we'll just use the initial numbers. We'll round it down. Let's say you have an average, when we were done, we had an $830,000 rental. We'll just call it 800,000. And let's say you had a $200,000 mortgage on it, right? And we decide that for this person's goals, this would be a pretty aggressive goals, by the way. If someone want to have 10 of these like this, they want to basically mirror that up until they get to 10. And every deal is going to look a little different. So the average value per unit is going to vary. But let's say when they finally get to 10, they've basically been able to mirror that. Some are more, some are less. But let's say they have 10 properties, which means they now have $8 million worth of real estate with $2 million worth of mortgage leverage on it when they're finally done building that portfolio. Okay.
Yep.
Then we go to the next phase. In the next phase, we are basically holding these properties, letting them grow, using the same basic real estate strategies that normal buy and hold people do. If they're leveraged, you're going to get leverage growth. So at the beginning, you have $6 million in equity, right? The 12 to 15 year period represents two different time frames. Based on your projection of appreciation, somewhere between 10 to 15 years after you acquire, we're hoping that you'll get close to doubling the value of your real estate, which is why I give a range. Okay. Maybe it's going to take the full 50, maybe longer. With rates being higher, I do expect it to be a lot less than the previous years. So, from 2012 to 2022, we were doubling like every 7 years, right? But I don't think that it's going to sustain that rate, right? So let's say it's going to take 12 or 15. That actually works very beautiful with the tax strategy that's out there called, the tax strategy, you have to blend a handful of things. In real estate, there's a phantom expense that you can use to offset income. And if you're not a real estate professional, you can normally only use it to offset the rental income on those properties. But there's two different methods to which you can use, again, talk to your tax person, but there's two different methods where you can accelerate the depreciation. And now it creates a much bigger expense in your tax returns. And the IRS will actually allow you to take those losses against your W-2 income. So if you're this high earning W-2 or business owner who's making, 3, 6, 900,000 of taxable income a year, you already know you're getting killed in taxes. And this strategy is not only going to give you cash flow on your rentals, but it's going to give the cash flow on your rentals is not only going to be tax free, but if you can incorporate these other strategies, it will also start to reduce your taxes on your regular income.
Yeah. Let me break this down real quick.
Okay.
There's the way that I try to describe it and think about it is there's really sort of two types of income that you can sort of get. There is active income, which is like your W-2 income.
Right.
And there's passive income, which is like long-term rental income. All right. The way the tax code works is you can only offset active income with active expenses or active deductions. And when you have passive income, any deductions or expenses related to that are only passive. So what you're trying to do and what Keane is explaining is trying to find a way to change the characterization of your passive income into active income, which then lets you incorporate all of your new expenses into all of your active income. And long-term rentals generally, really pretty much always are considered passive income. So this idea of buying a long-term rental and accelerating the depreciation is not necessarily always a good idea because there's nowhere for you to use that unless you have a lot of passive income for some reason. Okay.
Right.
So
most people don't. If you're doing what I'm doing, you're not there yet. You're trying to get there, but you're not there yet.
Right. That's right.
So why is it that we want to get the real estate professional designation or short-term rental property as a strategy? Is because what Chris just talked about. So in my W-2 income is really high. Diane is an employee in the branch, but she's not a full-time employee. She's a part-time employee. She works here just a couple hours a week, and she primarily doesn't do anything other than HR-related things, bookkeeping for the P&L. As a business owner, she's good at that stuff. And then maybe translates, she's not even a loan officer, but if you'll get a Vietnamese client, I'll do the loan and she'll translate for us, right? We'll jump on joint phone calls. That's literally the extent of what she does in the branch, nothing else.
Yep.
Her full-time job is she owns a property management company and manages all of our rentals, and half of them are short-term rentals. So she's spending, like right now, all the calls and texts she was just sending me a second ago are like, where's the sheets for the new Kirkland short-term rental? And I'm like, sorry, I was there the weekend with Keane and we wanted to just test the washer and dryer. So we ran it through the washer and dryer to make sure they were working fine. But that's because she's physically there trying to get the place ready. Her full-time job is working on our properties and managing them, right?
Yep. Okay,
so
real quick aside. What he's talking about, by the way, are two separate ways to do this. Okay. Yep. One is to be deemed a real estate professional. This is generally the harder way. Okay.
Yes.
The other is if you have short-term rentals, you can utilize those short-term rentals. They can be classified as active income, and then you can deduct or sort of write off the expenses, the depreciation associated with the short-term rentals onto your active income. So there's two different ways to do it. They are doing them both, but I just want to make that clear. Like, you don't have to actually do both. You can do one or the other. If you are the difference though is if you are a real estate professional, I believe you can take all of your income, whether it's long-term or short-term, becomes active income. With your short-term rentals, if you also have long-term rentals, then it's going to be divided up. Your long-term rentals will continue to be deemed as passive income, and your short-term rentals and anything that's associated with that will be deemed as active income, and you can write it off.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep. See, you know what you're talking about, Chris. You're learning all the stuff, right? So yes, if she was not a real estate professional, but we had positive rent on 3 rentals, let's say we have 2 that were short-term rentals, we wouldn't accelerate and do a cost segregation on the long-term rentals. We just let them stay on the regular schedule because we just need enough to offset the passive income. Correct. But the short-term, if we weren't doing the real estate professional designation, we would do a cost segregation study on those, which would speed up the depreciation cycle. And then that would make the properties look like a taxable, it creates a bigger loss. Remember, depreciation is a phantom expense. It's not a real expense, right?
Yep.
And then that loss flows over to our active income. So the short-term rental strategy allows you to not be a real estate professional because you're actively managing that. You have to have material participation in those properties. That's why when I hear people say, oh, it's such a pain in the ass, it's extra work. I'm like, yes, but you have to understand what the tax code is saying. If it wasn't a pain in the ass, and if you weren't doing the extra work, right, then they wouldn't let you take the write-off. The whole concept is that you have to physically do the work. Because when people ask how, go ahead.
I was just going to say, before we go any further, this is like disclaimer number 2, or like we're going to reiterate the disclaimer here. If you're going to use either one of these strategies, it's really important to take like 20 minutes and learn what the true qualifications are for both of these. Okay. Yep. Because you're not super likely to sort of get called out by the IRS, but if you do, you want to make sure that you actually meet the qualifications so that you can actually utilize these strategies. Okay. So it does take work. There is some more stuff to do. You can't just say like, I'm a short-term rental person and just like do it. So like you really do want to make sure that you are being as compliant as possible. And with both of these, there are sort of like 5 different ways that you can qualify, but you really want to make sure that you know what they are and meet those qualifications. Okay.
Yeah. And, and just to reflect on that, like I'll give 2 things, 2 stories. One, I remember when we first started doing this, I remember because I asked Diane to just trust me, but I said, look, you are going to have to do a lot of work on these, but I'm going to try to design it so it's the work that you like.
Yeah.
And so even in recent years, we've gotten in arguments, and she's like, oh my God, what have you got me into? I am giving her I'm trying to make sure that we can still hire out people to help us with our properties. And I'm trying to isolate the work to the things that she prefers by making sure that the work she does meets the IRS's qualifications as a real estate professional. And so the arguments we've had is like, I do like doing this, but you've made it so much that, right? I'm like, I know, babe, but just remember that if the IRS would ever audit us, this conversation is the whole reason why we fly through with flying colors. Because they're going to say, we want you to prove that you meet this minimum hours, which I believe is like $750 a year minimum. And also, if you're a real estate professional, it's supposed to be more than half of your work. Right. And so if she were ever asked to prove that, she would probably laugh in their face and be like, $750 and more than 50%. How about it's like, 3,000 hours a year.
Right.
And it's like 50% of my life. I literally spend like 12 hours a day doing it on a 24-hour schedule. Come audit it. It's going to pass me with flying colors. And so I did design it that way. And unfortunately, she was the brunt of it because I'm not the real estate professional. She is. Right.
Yep.
The hack on that, by the way, is this. My W-2 income being really high, I can still use her losses to offset my W-2 income because we're filing them jointly. That's the loophole. Yep. So because we're married and we're filing jointly. So if you're not married, this real estate professional designation is not easy to do if you already have a high paying job.
For sure.
But it works really well if you're filing jointly and your spouse can take that designation. Okay. But the SDR thing you can still do. Some people ask, how much work is this stuff really going to take? Because they don't know if they have the time. So I want to touch on that just for a second. It does take work and it is time, but it's not what most people think it is. Now, the portfolio we have, it's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. But I also know that for most of my clients, I projected that most of them are going to be fine with 5 to 10 properties. We have 30.
Right.
And currently, almost half of them are short-term rentals. So it is a lot of work for us.
Yeah, you guys are crazy.
It is like, yeah, we're a little nuts. But the good news is that like we're projecting to way bigger than what we were planning. So most people don't need that. If you're trying to get to 400 to 600 grand of passive a year, 5 to 10 in the Seattle area projects to do the number, right? But we're projecting to like a 3 times that number. Okay, and so it is a lot of work. But for most people, when you say how much work is it really, what I would say is if you ever had a very active hobby, that's it. This, Chris knows this because Chris is one of 3 of my best friends in the whole wide world. And they all go on a golfing trip and always remind me that I could go. And I'm the only one who doesn't know how to golf. But I know that currently, and there'll be a time where I will start to back off the stuff that I'm doing. But I know that the bandwidth that I would be giving towards learning how to play golf to their level is this thing. And I need and I need to stay here for just a little bit longer. And so for when you say how much time is it really going to take, I'll give you some examples where I would give an equal comparison. 5 to 10 properties, including developing and managing short-term rentals, is if let's say you already have your 10, and people say, well, how much work is that really? I would say if you golf a couple times every single month, that's about the same amount of hours. It will just be stretched out differently. Yep. But what it'll actually feel like managing short-term rentals when they're already done, in terms of the time frame that you spend on it, is basically the equivalent of someone who might be in multiple fantasy football leagues, but it doesn't end at the end of the season. It's just it's annual. And people laugh. They go, "Really? That's it?" I'm like, "Well, no. I'm saying like I used to do fantasy football, so I know this. Like if you're playing to win, you set your lineups every single week. You're reading injury reports. You're looking at weather reports. Whatever, right? And you're setting up lineups for multiple teams. You're on your phone or computer a couple hours every week, and you're kind of doing it several times throughout the week. I'm telling you that managing my 12 short-term rentals with a proper, property management system designed for it is no more work than when I was in 3 fantasy football leagues. And 3 is a lot. I'm not going to lie, 3 is a lot. But I have 12 short-term rentals. So if you had 6 properties and only 3 were short-term rentals, it's like being in 1 league. And most people do have that in their bandwidth. So when people say, I don't have the time for it, I'm so busy. I'm like, look, I got kids, I got a business, I'm busy too. But I'm choosing that this is my hobby. I don't golf. I don't work on old classic cars, right? I'm not learning how to be a cook, right? A lot of people have these very active hobbies. And I always laugh when they say, you're so smart, you know how to do all these things. I'm like, I'm not. The smartest thing I did was dedicate my time into space. But when I hear my friends talk about things that I'm not knowledgeable about, like sports or this team that they're really into or MMA or whatever, right? Or classic cars, right? There's that knowledge there. And if that was applied in this space, it translates. But you're just choosing where you put it. So let me move on from that. Because a lot of people get, oh, this sounds great, but this is way too much work. It's 2 to 3 fantasy football leagues. If you can handle that, you might not be able to do both. So when people ask, like, can I really do this? I would say if you currently have a hobby you spend a lot of time in, you have to ask yourself if you really have the bandwidth for both. And you probably have to choose to either not do this or quit that hobby. But if that sacrifice is worth it, right? And so for me, I think it's worth it.
Right. Look, here, we got to wrap up pretty soon. Phase 1. We'll wrap up phase 1. But here's the deal. If you want to make money at something, it's going to take work. Mm-hmm. Like this idea of like just walking into money is ridiculous. So, if this sounds hard, well, I don't know if it's hard. It takes some time to learn at the beginning for sure.
Yep.
But that's just like anything that you're going to do that's new. So, if you have a bunch of excuses about why you can't do it, that's fine. Because there's a bunch of people out there that will, and they'll just be wealthy and you just won't,
Yep.
And that's okay.
Yep.
That's okay.
So the goal of phase 2 is to maximize your cash flow and get some tax savings. So we're going to do the normal leverage growth in real estate. So remember, we're waiting for these things to double in value. So if our portfolio is 10 rentals, each worth 800 grand with a $200,000 mortgage, so we have a $6 million equity position, right? Then over the next, let's say it took 15 years and it doubled in value. You went from 8 million to 16 million in value, but your equity grew more than double because of the leverage, right? And over that 15 years, you probably pay off about a third of your balance. And so your balance goes from 2 million to about like 1.3. Okay. So
Yep.
your equity went from 6 million to 14.7 million. Okay. That number is the important number that we're going to need to trade out of for our cash flow. But the beauty of this plan is that you're not waiting until the end of the 15 years to get a benefit. If you're doing the other things, you're doing some short-term rentals, you're maximizing your cash flow, inflation slowly raises rates, you are getting cash flow from these rentals. Maybe it's only, maybe of those properties, you only average $300 each and you have 10 of them, right? So it's only 3,000 a month. At the end of that 15-year period, it's going to be, you have opportunities to refinance, right? Rent will go up. It might get closer to 5 to 6, and it's still money. But what it's really also doing for you is it's also sheltering. That money is tax-free if you do this strategy, and you're getting savings on your other income, which if you make $500,000 a year, you already know you're getting killed in taxes. So each year we save 6 figures in taxes a year. So on a net basis, it's improved our income net to us about 150 grand a year between the cash flow and the tax savings. And I'm going to get that for the next 10, 15 years while I wait for the double in value. This is a good chance to put money in the stock market or just improve your life now, right?
Right.
So that's the other two pieces. We get the tax savings for that period of time, and we also get the cash flow. So I always tell people at that stage, even though we're not ready to retire yet, you can probably start to take on some of your retirement planning, and you don't have to wait to 15 years to benefit from it because you're no longer killing yourself trying to put money away.
Right.
You're set. You're
still
kind of
feeling
setting yourself
good.
up. Yeah.
You're feeling good.
Your income's gone up, and you don't have to put more money away, and you're going to be set, right?
Right. And you're
so
paying less
you can already start to make some life changes, and that's exactly where we're at now. Okay.
Yep.
So now we get to the phase.
We're going to wrap it here. No, we're going to wrap it up here.
Okay.
We're going to do phase 3 the next time. Okay. We got to set the hook. You can sort of see what phase 3 is here, but we'll set the hook for phase 3 for next time. All right.
Okay.
So if by the way, if people are watching this in the future and you have questions or comments, leave them. Probably direct you to YouTube. I'll have the link, but have comments, questions, whatever. Then we'll talk about them here, or we'll respond, on the platform. So This was cool. I like this so far, and a lot of fun stuff. And although some of here's the thing that I would do if I were you watching right now. If we talked about things and you're not sure what they are, it doesn't make sense. We're talking about real estate professional status. Just go to Google and search some of this stuff. Like be inquisitive, and learn what's going on. And in no time, you'll have a good grasp of this. But just the key is just to sort of fumble around with it long enough until it catches on, because I think that's what I've had to do. And it's just not as hard as you think. Okay. So
and ask us. And then also, that's the other thing I do with Google is that when something I want to deep dive into it more, then you go to YouTube and then also ask ChatGPT. It's like whatever I get from Google, if I want to go a little deeper, I watch videos and talk to ChatGPT. I get a deeper understanding, and then you come up with a plan, and then you talk to your team that you've hired or get references for a team to validate how that plan is going to work for you. And then you start to tighten it all up, right?
100%. 100%. All right, we're gonna wrap this up. That's phase 1 and phase 2. We'll be back next week with at least phase 3, probably with phase 4. I don't even know how many phases there are, but we're gonna go.
There's really there's a third phase, and there's an extra credit to the third phase to it. So it's kind of like a phase 4, but not really. But we'll cover both of them.
So maybe this will be part 2 will be coming next time. And until then, I am Chris.
I'm Keane.
This is the Business Barbershop Podcast. See ya.
See you guys later.